My name is Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today our guest is Kunzang Choden. Kunzang is one of Bhutan's most legendary authors, and also the first Bhutanese woman to write and publish a novel in English. Kunzang brings us on a tour of her ancestral home, located in Bhumtang's Tang Valley, that was turned into a museum which offers a first-hand view of daily life for Bhutanese religious nobility during the 19th and 20th century. We then go to the main temple and see some of the chapels held in this two-storied space. This is part 2 of 2 parts. The first was a sit-down interview with Kunzang, which you can find in the show notes.
This building is called the Utsi, or the Central Tower, and it has 4 floors. We are on the ground floor. On the ground floor, we have 7 rooms, and in the old days when we had a lot of grains, when we had a lot of fields, all these were grain storage rooms, because until 1969, we were not a monetized economy. So the first bank was introduced only in 1969, and we had our first currency only in 1969. So families like this, to have the economic and their social status and power, was the amount of grains they had, because those grains was used as currency. We paid people in grains. We traded among ourselves, barter system in grains. So it was very important. And here there are 7 floors. So we were self-sufficient. As I said in the earlier part, that we had enough to eat, but we didn't have a lot of variety. But I can never remember a time in my entire life when we had scarcities, but we didn't have famines or starve, because there was enough grains. And the immediate village and other villages would also come and take grains from here. So every room was filled with grains. Now, when we turned that part of the building into the guest house, we had to have a dining room. So the loom room was actually there. So we transferred it here so that we could turn that into the dining room. And we were self-sufficient in food, and we had to be also self-sufficient in our clothing. So there was a lot of work done on fabric production, looms, and every woman knew how to weave, how to process wool, how to process cotton, silk, to make enough clothes for ourselves, because there were no shops that you could just go and buy. So our family also owned sheep, and I remember when, all around the compound, the sheep used to come. There were at least, I think, 150 or so much sheep our family had, and every village household had a few sheep. Now all that is gone, because economics is such that it is no longer beneficial to raise sheep when you can buy sheep wool so easily. But at the time we had our own sheep, we processed the wool. From the time we sheared, we cleaned, we colored and wove. And then, of course, most of the colors were our natural colors, which we collected from the environment. And it's only much later, and now many of the colors are synthetic colors. So the natural colors are much more muted and softer colors, and these are quite the harsh, bright colors here. Now we are in the room which we have designated as the display for the textiles. This used to originally be the rooms for storage of grains. Here we have some samples of the typical textiles woven here, and you can see there are 3 different kinds, and they are coming in looms as big as this, and they come in one strip, and it's up to the person how to cut it and how to use it. I mean, nowadays most people use it as wall hangings, but in those days it was used really for a function. They would have been used for covers, blankets, even some of them are used as raincoats, just rain cloaks. Okay, here you see a typical yatha pattern, and this I I think most people will agree, is associated with one of the main textiles from Bhumtang. I translate Ya Cha, which means Ya means mountains and Cha as the patterns. So I always imagine, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I always imagined that the women were inspired by the patterns that they saw on the mountains, because there are no documents or sources that they can refer to for their pattern. It all comes out from their head. So I think it was just, they just looked into nature and saw the patterns there. Now, textile expert or even a weaver will be able to tell you what each pattern is, but I don't have that expertise. And the lines, the bands of colors that you see here like this, we refer to them as bringing the rainbow colors together, jadik. Okay, so that's how it is. So this is the one that is what we call a regular yata. This is called a kata with the background of white. And then we have black. Black wool also we use. We didn't throw it away. In fact, we reared the sheep white and black together, and we didn't separate them. Only after you had sheared the wool, then the women would sit and sort out, the white that can be used for coloring, then the black that was used for other purposes, and then we had the off-whites, which were not so valued, used for making mats and things like this. Besides the wool, we also use cotton. This is an example of a cotton. We sourced our cotton from the southern and eastern parts of Bhutan, and they also use silk, which we got mostly from the east. And this is what is called the raw silk. It's not as fine as the Chinese silk, but very durable, and it ages very beautifully. The more you use, the softer it gets, and then it's very beautiful. But Bhutanese weavers also had a way of combining the cotton and silk and mixing them together. I would like to point out to this one, which is really needlework and applique work, and that the needlework, the weaving was done by the women exclusively, but the needlework was done mostly by the men. And these were not any men, but they passed on, or they practiced and they perfected their profession of needlework and applique work in the monastery. Yeah, there's just an example, because I thought, even though they had pieces, I thought it's a good example of what was done in the old days. Now, of course, people do fantastic work, but this is here because it was in the house. It may have been 100 years old or so, so it's really an ancient treasure. We have a government-sponsored textile museum in Thimphu that tells the most complete story of textiles. It's called the Royal Textile Academy. So they have exhibits there and changing exhibits, and it's happening, exciting place. But ours here is just a sampling of what we have, what we remember, what is valuable to us. So these are two kiras, that women's dresses. One is of the raw silk and one is of cotton. And these kiras, the full kiras comprised of 3 panels. They were woven as 3 separate panels and stitched. And what I notice here is that these were hand stitched, which means that they were pre-machine days. Sewing machines came quite late, so everything had to be hand stitched. And the 3 panels have been joined like this. And here you see the example of the cottons that we source from the southern part of central Bhutan. If you go from Tongsa down south, there were people who grew cotton. And the cultivation of cotton just died down because it was just too tedious and cumbersome, whereas you could get cotton from India so easily. But now there is an awareness and an appreciation. So there are different agencies who are trying to encourage people to grow cotton, process it, and produce niche products. And this is quite nice. They try to keep to the old patterns, and they make bags and purses and things like that. So it's coming back, which is good, because otherwise it would have been lost completely. We inherited houses, property, and jewelry, but we also inherited clothes. And clothes were really important because in those days you couldn't just buy clothes. And every cloth, every piece of clothing had a story to tell. And so here is just a few samples. This one here belonged to my great grandmother 6 generations ago, and it is made of raw silk, and it's an old pattern. Now it's being duplicated because the weavers are so excellent in their craftsmanship. You can see after 6 generations it's still in very good condition. It's not only the parents' clothes that we valued, but we were very blessed to have a sample of the first king's go and the second king's go. People ask, how did you get these clothes? And I imagine that for the king to give a personal garment to somebody was to show some kind of appreciation for what these people may have done. So I imagine my great-grandfathers must have gone and been with the king, and he must have been pleased, and it's kind of an award almost. So you can see it has not been worn. I'm sure my great-grandfathers wore it once a year for a special occasion and packed it away. And the same with the second king's garment. But the difference here is that this one is of raw silk. So that means the silk that was produced here in Bhutan or in Assam, Indian state of Assam, and all are natural colors. And by the time of the second king, he became the king in 1937 or so, already synthetic colors and the fine silk, Chinese silk, was being brought here. So it just compares very well how things evolved, changed, and what came into our, what was available to us. Here in this corner, we have just made a little display to honor my mother, and these are all her clothes. What may be interesting for people who know how the Bhutanese women's dress is that in the old days, during my mother's time, in the 40s and 50s, right into 60s, women wore really broad belts, which were, not to show the size of your belt, waist to show how thin it was, but to really show display the cloth. And it was more like a Japanese obo. With the kimono, they had the obo. So it was really the exquisite work was done. And then you made a broad belt, and your jacket was smaller, shorter, so that it showed. Then with that, over the years, the belt became smaller and smaller and more practical. And then it became really small and thin, and you just had a small belt. But now, in the last 15 years or so, women have completely revolutionized the kira, and you have what is called the half kiras. So we've taken off completely the top side, and we just wear it like a skirt with hooks and Velcro. With this change, these ornaments which held up the kiras, silver brooches that held up the kira, have become redundant. Although now there is again a new awareness, and it's become a fashion statement to be able to wear the old kiras, show off the belt, as well as to show off the silver brooches, which is nice. I mean, for practical everyday wear, you wear the skirts, but then on special occasion like sechus or so, women still like to put on the old style, but with modern. Here is another kira, which was said to be my mother's, and it's a very elaborately done work. If you know how the patterning takes, that there are different kind of patterns. Some patterns you can inbuild into the warp when you're making the warp, and the patterns will emerge as you weave. But some patterns you have to pick. Each one is picked. So this is a combination of the patterns in the warp and the middle patterns here. Each one has been embroidered, like embroidery. It's not with the needle, so it's really woven into the cloth. Yeah, so this is what it is. So this room, actually, when we put out the exhibits, we wanted the rooms the way they were used and for the function that they were used. So this was the room where we used to keep all the horse saddles and the trading material. You can see the back horse saddles and the bells that the horses, the caravans would wear, and some of the important items that we traded. So we brought mostly salt from Tibet. And here, this painting is quite new in that it was not there originally, but a local artist here, in fact, a temple keeper, Ngawang, I said, how would you imagine the trading, going to Tibet and coming from there with the trade? And he came and he did this, the caravans going, the people traveling over the mountains and coming to bringing the goods. He's a folk artist. It's not like the temple murals where it's following iconography. It's just the way he imagined. Also, you would see the difference is that he used only earth colors. Yeah. So these are all natural colors.
Yeah, you can tell. And this saddle here is so interesting.
These are what we call the back saddles. So these were put on the horses and yaks, and the loads were put on either side. The bags of salt, those would have been the bags of grains, and they would have been put on the back of the horse, like this. And then this side would be one bag and this side would be one bag and tied. So the horses really had to carry quite heavy loads.
And so these are all the tools in here?
Yeah, the farm tools, construction tools, woodworking tools, whatever was needed to maintain a household like this. I mean, the family couldn't do everything ourselves, so we had a lot of people who did these works for us. But in a farming family, they will have not as many, but they will have the same tools, and somebody from the family would have used it.
Everything from here is pretty much from your house.
Yes, this is really one of the big blessings for us. When we wanted to make a museum, we didn't have to acquire any of the artifacts. Everything was there. In fact, the artifacts were all spread across all over the house. So we just took the things that were not in these specified places and brought them together. That's how the exhibits were made. We try to keep it as true as possible to how it was originally used. This room is special, and you can see that it's in the center of the layout of the other rooms, and this was where the rice store was. And because rice was precious, because we didn't grow rice here, rice had to be brought from our subtropical estates and brought here and kept here, so it got the central place. And these boxes were like silos. The rice would be carried up, put in, and then taken out from here. As I was saying, the people in the village, rice was very rare for them. Now it's, of course, everybody eats rice, but in the old days it was mostly buckwheat and wheat that they ate. So this is the distillation room where we made the alcohol, and the one behind you is the kitchen. But these were also storerooms. The kitchens and the alcohol distillation rooms were outside. So, but for the sake of the museum, we brought them here so that they are under the same roof and make it much more comprehensive. So we made a lot of alcohol ourselves, mostly using barley. We made different alcohol, and the most complicated one was when we distilled with this apparatus, and then we stored them in these kind of containers. There was a lot, but it wasn't a big problem because it was limited by the fact that people had alcohol only when it was made in the home, so they couldn't just drink. Unlike now, when anyone can go to the bar and drink as much as you like. And somehow I think it was in the hands of the women of the house who said, okay, this much grain is for the food, we don't touch that, and only this much is allocated for alcohol, and that was it. So they said somehow they had the control. But nowadays we have a lot of problem with alcohol because alcohol is cheap, it's available, and it's everywhere.
Because it does seem like Bhutan has a beautiful traditional alcohol, ceremonial
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yeah, we have
like the nakpa.
Yeah.
Like with the one that has like egg in
Oh,
it.
okay. Changke.
Changke, yeah.
Changke in the Nakpa. Nakpa is in my language. I'm wondering,
okay.
how did you eat? How did you have Nakpa?
I have some Bhumtang friends.
Yeah. So that is actually fermented broth. And alcohol also, we could have 3 different kinds. The first one was just like fermented grains, pouring water into the fermented grains, and then it would just ferment. So you get a very light, kind of a frothy kind of a drink. And then the same grains, of course, you could make by putting it into a pot, heating it with some water, and extracting the juice. Then the most complicated one is the ara, where you actually distill it by condensation. And that is the most complex way to make it and the most potent. Yeah.
And is that one mainly used for specific purposes?
Oh, just for pleasure
Just for
and
pleasure,
for
yeah.
offering in the temple, and something to have in the house to see off, welcome guests and parcels and gifts.
And is there anything here we want to speak of? The kitchen, like typical kitchen?
Yeah, this there was no kitchen, as I told you, but all the things are from our original kitchen. All the pots and pans and ladles. This room is the storeroom, and this was to give out the rations to the kitchens, because in the old days when we didn't have money, everybody was paid with grains and food, and the people who worked on with the family were given food every day. So the mother of the house, my mother, I remember coming here, measuring out 20 people working, so many measures of rice or salt or chili, butter, whatever had to be measured out, and the cooks would cook the meals. That's how it happened here.
Do you remember at all what it was for one person?
These are the measuring tools, okay? We didn't use a lot of weights. Most of it was by volume. So these were for measuring flour, measuring rice, and for rice you would get a whole container full. The salt was there, that was for the entire thing. And if it was a breakfast rice, two people, this amount of rice would be shared between 2 people.
Is this per meal or per day?
Per meal.
Wow, that's a lot of rice, actually.
It's a lot of rice, yeah. That's why we always talk about ourselves eating piles, mountains of rice, yeah.
And then these tools, what are these for?
This is what do you call a rotating mill, hand mill. So you grind grains there, and these containers were for, when the cooks came here to take the whatever ration they were taking, they would come to receive in these kind of bowls and say, okay, here's the butter, here's the thing, and that was for the grains. So sometimes we use this for living here, sleeping, eating, everything here, and other times when we had guests, they would stay here. So what we have replaced, what we have displayed here is actually our festival which takes place every year. And that, I can't say that the festival may have started during Dorji Lingpa's time or not, but it is an ancient tradition we still follow. And that's the time when we change all the flags on the roofs, and we change the big flag. And it's kind of a testimony of how the community comes together. Then for 3 days, we just pray together, interact, eat together. So these are all the weapons that we use to defend ourselves in times of war, in times of battles among ourselves. But mostly our main enemies were Tibetans in the north and the British in the south after they came here. So, we didn't have a standing army as such, but we had kind of a militia that in times of problems, the leaders would ask families to raise their own army. And so my great-grandparents, I guess, they would have to have all the tools, arm the army. I mean, they would give 100 people or 50 people, however they, not only us, but households like this. It's kind of a form of tax. So this is all the remains from there. And they were really good with their arrows. Here, these are all the household items that survived over time. So these would have been the utilitarian containers that were used by the family on special times, everyday kind of thing. And these would have been the old ceremonial teapots. This is where you would, if you had come 120 years before, we would have served you tea in here. Now we give you in the mug. 1969, when we had the first bank, these were the first currency notes that were issued. Before that, we had some coins, which some were minted in Bhutan, but many of them were from the neighbors. They're Indian coins, Tibetan coins, Chinese coins. So now, of course, we are fully monetized, although barter, it hasn't died out completely. We still, say I give you a basket of chili and you give me this many grains. We still do.
You still do that in this area?
Yeah. I told you we had no Western, modern, allopathic medicine. We had only indigenous, traditional medicine, and that was mostly plant-based. So in my household, in my memory, there was always somebody who knew how to, mix and make them into pills and powders, and we relied on mostly these. And these were also in the house. So that's what we had. I think it was a combination of the Ayurvedic Indian with the medicine, and because the pulse, they took the pulse, the doctors, indigenous could take the pulse, and with these two combinations, that's how our medicine was. But the problem is because it was not diagnostic, they couldn't tell you if it was something with the blood or something like that.
I see. Yeah. And who in your family was the
my
medicine?
Uncle.
Your uncle?
I can remember my father also was doing something, but it was mostly my uncle who was a monk. So he was doing a lot. I mean, there are certain plants that grow during the season, and we as children were asked even to go and pick up, bring some plants and berries and things like this. And they're very precise in measuring it, and I don't know what all sort of things they added. Some had to be cooked into kind of gel-like things. Some were pills and some were in powder form, and each dose of the powder form would come in a little packet, and you had to eat the whole packet with warm water. And these were we needed everything in the household. Look, it's baskets and things to mend and everything. We needed ropes for all sort of things. So all this was in the house because there were no markets where you just could go and buy them. So we had to have everything in the store. Used to be the meditation room of my uncle who was a monk. And this is his, not his bed where he slept, but this was his meditation box where he would sit and pray. And whatever you see on the walls hanging were the clothes that the people who lived in these rooms wore. We didn't put them in cupboards. Whatever we used, regularly, we hung them on the walls like on these pegs. And whatever you didn't use frequently, then we put them in boxes. So there are no cupboards. The main furniture in every room is the altar room.
So these are still in many homes now?
Oh, yes. In the old days, you had to find a carpenter who was specialized in making these. But now these you can, if you want to buy one, in a shop, they have all kind of sizes and how many, frames you want, what kind of height and all. Everything is now available. And now people, the brighter, the bigger, the shinier you equate with wealth. So a lot of people put a lot of gold and sparkle and many statues and things like this. But in the old days, it was much more modest, and they didn't use a lot of gold and, things like this.
One of my favorite things about your home are the wall paintings and the flowers and the decorations. And I imagine these look like natural pigments.
Yeah, these are natural pigments.
Yeah.
Our temple caretaker, he can go around and say, here you get the yellow, here you get the white. He knows. Only the red we don't have. We have the black. The yellow is most readily available, and then he mixes. These were the original paintings were there, and this was exactly how it is. When we read it, we just touched up. Now we are in the kind of the office reception room where the patriarch or whoever the head of the family was would sit and receive guests and even family members, and they would sit around. And these rooms are very cold, so in the winter you had to have a means of warming, and these were the charcoal braziers, which you just warmed your hands actually. And we didn't make open fires because the whole thing is wood. It was too dangerous, too risky to make fire. So here we have the pictures which show the origin of Ogyen Choling, and I explained to you how this place was chosen and the first person associated with the place and who is believed to have actually named this place is Longchenpa, and he was from the 12th, 13th century. Later on, I explained about the Datans, the treasure discoverers, Dorji Lingpa from Tibet. He came, and his son, Sonam Hlendup, is the first known ancestor. And all this gives the, all the different generations and the people here. And finally, this is the picture of my great-great-grandfather who actually rebuilt this place. And here you can see the three men who were his son's sons, and my father was the oldest, so he inherited this property. Whereas the two brothers, one went away, married and went away, and the other one was a monk. So he was the youngest uncle, and he was the one who basically brought us up. My mother and father had died already by 64, so he brought us up. And here is what we say are the 20th generation, my generation, and these are pictures of my siblings and their children. Of course, now it goes on because they have their own children also. Our ancestors were not really, important political or huge economic powers, but they spent a lot of time in religious affairs and scholarship. So although it wasn't a big, well-known printing place, the only printing house in Bhutan which had any repute was the one in Punakha, which burned down in 1936 or so. So many of the texts, the manuscripts, were actually brought from Kham that far. Then later on, of course, it changed. But it looks like our ancestors spent a lot of time in their own way propagating by printing. So all these are different wood blocks, printed on wood blocks, and whatever they thought was important, they printed. Or they even had special texts that they had carvers, wood block workers, to work on them, and then they printed on Bhutanese daphne paper, which is handmade, what we call handmade paper. And these are really old wood blocks, but we tested them, and the prints are still quite special. You can see them. So the prints were not just for text, but they also for different occasions, for different rituals. You can see the different kind of prints. This is the sword with the fire, which is usually carried by Jambeyang, and it is not a sword to hurt or go to battle with, but it is a sword to cut through ignorance and bring knowledge and wisdom. So the library, if you think of the whole museum as such, it's all artifacts of daily use, utilitarian artifacts. But for the wider influence and contribution to the general public would be the library. The texts that we used in the temple for prayers and for meditation and chants and things like this are in the temple, and these are really the books that were in the house being used by the family. We collected quite a big amount, so it looks like my ancestors were really book lovers, and not only lovers, but they were custodians as well as creators of books. And these were books that were just lying in every room because my parents died so suddenly. I think they, had books in all the rooms. And when we put the museum together, then we came across all the books and we brought them here. And over the years, some scholars became interested. So we had a project, it was Austrian funded, And the man who did this is one of the most respected Tibetologists. Himself is a Tibetan, and he offered to come and identify all the books because we had no idea what the books were and how they were. So he came here and spent several days, going through each page, going through each thing and knowing. So this is the catalog that he created. And many of them are prints that we got from woodblocks, but many of them are very valuable because they are manuscript written by hand. After we had done this in 2003, little later, our library was included in a project by the British Library for Endangered Archives. So all this is now digital because some of them, as I said, are very rare. Many of the libraries in Tibet were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So, there's a lot of activity going on by the academics and the lamas collecting and reprinting books and rewriting books. But some of them, which are very valuable, may have been the only copies. That's what we were told. So it's very, very precious. Books are not just that you can pull out and read wherever you like. Books are seen as sacred objects that you know. So that's why we treat them like, the Lama, the Sangha, and the Dharma. So this is the Dharma. It's the word of Buddha. So you give it the same respect as you would give to a statue of Buddha or a Lama who comes to teach you. We treat them like objects of worship. Water is offered, incense is offered, and then the Bhutanese pilgrims who come here, they actually make offerings at the altar, just like they would do at a different altar. Here you can see that we say books, but actually I think that the correct term is folios, they call it, because they're leaves. Then they had to be kept together between two wooden platters, or you can see them here, wooden planks. So they had one on top, one below, and then they were wrapped in cloth, and this was the outer cloth they were wrapped. And then they had, after they were wrapped, they were given belts also. So, it's really like dressing a person. So in continuation with what I told you about books and my ancestors being more religious than political or economic powers, they spent a lot of their resources, their time and their efforts into preserving many of the prayers, rituals and the festivals. So since the parents have died and we don't have a resident Lama as such, we are not able to do any of the mass dances and use all of the religious musical instruments. Instead of keeping them locked up, we have displayed them so people can have a chance to look at them. And of course, some of them we still use when we have the special prayers, like these horns. We use them, the drum also, and the horns. We don't want to crowd the exhibit, so we just have a select sample of the handheld drums, then the cymbals, and here we go through and see the costumes. When we used to have full-fledged setchus, which would go on for 3, 4, 5 days, and these were all the masks that the dancers wore. Here you see the costumes that went with the mass dancers. And here you see the different tools for many of our rituals. Along with the chodam is this thigh bone, which becomes a trumpet. And this one here is our astrological chart, which is where we get all our predictions and divinations. We make a horoscope for life based on this. When you're born, what age your parents are, what hour of the day or night you were born in. So they chart out the whole thing and they tell you. And even now, it's so important for us that in this age of technology and digital age, we have a school of astrology, and every day they give a prediction of what is good today. If you're traveling, travel east, don't cross a bridge on the west, don't get married on this day. It's on radio as well as on television. If you watch Bhutanese television, they will tell you today is good for this and not good for that. So these are the dance costumes. And of course, this also originated from Manjushri, the symbol of knowledge. So this is Amitayus and all the other deities that which a very personal chapel, so it was not like open to anybody who would come in. So I think many of my ancestors spent their time here meditating on Amitayus to prolong their lives. You've seen, no? Shabtung Namgyal, the man who unified Bhutan, and he was a priest also. He was from Ralung, from Tibet, but he unified Bhutan and made Bhutan what it is. Here are pictures of my great-great-grandfathers who actually rebuilt this place. They have a small image of them before photographs when they made offerings, and here were my great-great-grandmothers who are making offerings also. The murals here are really very special. Yeah. And this is my uncle who I said, he was a monk, he was in Tibet, he came from Tibet after Tibet was taken over by China in 1959. And then he had actually abandoned family, household and everything to go, but it was all because my parents died. Suddenly he had to come and take over, and as I said, he was the only parent we knew.
How did your parents pass?
At that time, there was not, we don't know what kind of disease they had. There was no medicine. Father was 37 and mother was 32. So they died very early. But in those days, there was even not the means to find out what kind of disease they had. My father was ill for a long time. My mother was sick for just 3-4 days and just died before anyone even could attend to her and find out what was wrong. So that's how it was. जब तक तेरा कुछ जरूरत है अभी जब तक तेरा ग्रंथ है This is what we call the Dolmal Hagang or the Tara temple. This is one of the 5 altars we have. This is the whole temple, and in the temple we have different altars. So this is dedicated to Tara. And here you see, of course, naturally, the central icon is Tara herself, and she is the green Tara, and she's sitting in a way that, she's just about ready to get up with her 1 foot out. On the left-hand side, you see Chenrisi Avalokiteshvara, and she is supposed to have been born out of the tear of Avalokiteshvara when he was overwhelmed with the suffering in the world, and he said, I cannot attend to everyone. So she said she was born from his tear and said, I will help you. Another interesting thing as a female deity, when everybody said that she has accomplished so much, now she's ready to be enlightened or be born as a male. And she said, no, I will keep the body of a female until every suffering sentient being is enlightened. This group is known as the 21 forms of Tara, and these are all the different forms of Tara when she can appear to you in every situation that you might call upon her. So this is, for me, my favorite altar and the one that I come to most regularly.
Who brought the Taras in here? How long ago was that?
This was when this temple was built after the earthquake of 1897. My great-grandfather dedicated this temple to his mother. It's not written, but the oral story is that he had asked the sculptor to create the face of Tara. I mean, everyone just says, this is Tara, this is Tara, this is Tara. But if you look closely, each has some, beside the iconographic rule, there is some kind of a personality in each face. And this one is supposed to be the face of his mother. So she's really part of the family, because in those days we didn't have portraits or pictures or anything like this, but this is supposed to be her.
What's her name?
Ishi.
It sounds like you have regular pujas.
Oh, yes, yes. We have regular pujas, and this is accessible to all. And the most regularly used place for performing prayers and things like this is here.
For the entire community.
Yeah, anyone can come and, they ask us and then we say it's okay. And mostly what we do is chanting of the Tara, 21 prayers of the Tara, and the Chö is done here.
Which Chö do you practice?
We do both. We do the Tujum Tersar and we do the other older ones also.
Is any of the Dorji Lingpa Terma practiced here?
Of course.
Yeah.
Not here, but in the upstairs. For a while, it was quite pure Dorji Lingpa, Dorling style. But now, with a lot of different influence, also different influences coming in, and even the style of practice, performance, and everything is getting quite mixed. In a way, it's just very nice because then you can't separate and say, this is this practice, that's wrong, this is this practice, this is the correct one, and we should do it that way. No, I actually am quite happy that it's all mixed up. When my uncle was the head Lama here, he tried to keep it as pure as possible, using only the text of Dorji Lingpa. It was called Lama Kadi, I think the performance was. But now it's all mixed up because there isn't a school of Dorji Lingpa and that we only practice according to him. Yeah, because even the tone of chants, the way you play the musical instruments, is a little bit different if you really understand from each master who propagated it. Yeah.
So who in this area is still keeping those transmissions alive?
When we have big special pujas, we always invite monks who are really accomplished. So these are the elder monks. And here our tradition is not a celibate monastery. The men who practice are lay monks. So they're farmers, but when the need is arising, they are able to drop down their farming tools and come and do the chants, which is nice. So we don't have the monks just sitting and chanting, but working, but when it's necessary. So there's at least about 6 or 7 men and women in the village who can come and do it. Yeah.
So beautiful. So all of your food is imbued with Dharma.
Oh yeah, the offerings are imbued
as farmers and
yeah, because they work and produce the food. Yeah, it's true. Now we are in the main altar of the entire building, and this is we call the Jol Hagang, which is like the Jol Hagang in Tibet. The central figure, of course, is the Buddha as a prince before he abandoned and left his palace to become a renunciate. Here you see him very different from the Buddha, without any ornaments, without any clothes, without any, crowns or anything like this. Here you see him as a prince, and that's why he has a crown, he has jewelry, he has, all the things that he was as a prince and Joe Sakyamuni. And of course, for us in Bhutan, the first Buddha, we don't know of him having come to Bhutan at all. And it was Guru Padma Sambhava who in the 8th century came here and taught Buddhism and introduced Buddhism. So he had the biggest impact on these regions converting to Buddhism and practicing. And today we feel his presence. So he was the one who came to Bhutan. And he also left a prophecy that his work will continue through his incarnations. And yesterday I was telling you about his incarnations that have come over the many centuries. And of all the incarnations, there is a group of 5 who are known to be his 5 most sacred, most inner incarnations. And one of them is Dorji Lingpa here. He was a real person who was sometime in the 1300s. He came here and he was from a family in Tibet, and that one on the extreme left is his father. And here on the right-hand side is his incarnation, Longchenpa. And of course, I was saying the origin of this place, how it started was when this Kunken Longchenpa, he came here. He was also from Tibet, but he came here and was in Bhutan for 10 years. And within the 10 years, I told you that he created 8 centers, and this Ogyen Choling is supposed to be one of the centers. And in those days, land was free, there was no borders, you could just choose to live. But the masters who set up or established their centers, they looked at the geomancy of the physical alignment of the place and things like this. So he chose this place, Longchenpa chose this place according to a tradition that we keep alive by telling it to each other, is because this land on which we stand, where the complex stands, is supposed to resemble the head of an elephant. So actually, this was the place which is on the crown of the elephant's head. And if you would look down from the distance from the south, its trunk actually goes into the river, life-giving force, water. And of course, you know that in Buddhist iconography, elephant is very special because of his strength and because of the many years. It lives up to 100+ years. So for these two reasons, and because the shape symbolized these two, he chose the place here. So the first known person who came here, set foot here and blessed it is Longchenpa. Dorji Lingpa came less than 100 years, and seeing that this place was blessed and chosen by Longchenpa, his son actually supposed to have stayed here, and our genealogy is said to have started from him. So the place was chosen, blessed, and it is the seed of faith, and the nucleus for the establishment of the place was thanks to Longchenpa choosing this place.
And so at that time, when this is the 14th century, right?
14th century.
At that time, then, were a lot of people in the area then a part of?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I always say there must have been some kind of a settlement here. Maybe our ancestors, my ancestors were here, and they were the kind of the patrons. I mean, because these monks have to be honored, they have to have food. All the followers who came here had to be fed. So I'm sure this was the place where they turned to for their physical sustenance. Well, they had all the spiritual sustenance from elsewhere. So I think there was always a family here. And we know that our ancestors, once they established themselves here, the villagers who are here today must have come here, saying this is a good place to be, and some kind of a client-patron relationship developed, and that's how I think everyone in the village here knows where they came, how many centuries ago, where they came from, and who were their ancestors. And it looks like they moved around a lot and then finally settled here. Yeah.
And do you know who, the incredible murals and of course the statues, do you know who painted them?
The temple was destroyed, but according to oral tradition, it was not fully destroyed. So the foundation and the beginning of the wall down there was not destroyed, so they just built it up from there. So it's in the same place pre the earthquake. New statues were added. We'd have the oldest statues in the temple there. It's not for viewing, but they were the real ancient one. And it's Guru Padmasambhava and Buddha. And the paintings were done by a painter master from Tibet. What is very special is that the paintings have stayed intact. After all this, it's over 100 years, we haven't done any maintenance, but it has stayed. And what we have been told by experts is that all the paints are not earth paints or chemical paints, but they're mineral paints. So that's why they have much more lasting quality.